60. He is State Representative Dave Reed, the House Majority Leader, joining us in the studio this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
I didn't know if I would be talking to you from here or from Harrisburg because it's really starting to gear up here in the month of June, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, you've got budget talks going on right now. This budget season compared to previous budget seasons, better, worse? Not yet able to tell.
So far, it's been better, and I think that's by nature of we're not dealing with a $1 billion, $3 billion, $4 billion deficit. It looks like revenues for this past year are going to basically be online with where we expected them to be, and you'll see some projected increases over the next year. So, the last couple of years have obviously not been that great. Not a great deal of fun from a budgetary perspective, a lot of tough decisions, but it looks like some of those decisions are starting to actually pay off, where I think this year we're going to end up with a budget with no taxes increased in any form, no fee increases or anything like that, be able to see some increases to education funding and a few other things, probably keep the rate of spending increase below the rate of inflation. And I actually think we may have a shot to put some money in the rainy day fund for once, which shows a stark contrast to where we've been in recent years.
Governor Wolf still calling for the severance tax on natural gas. How's that discussion going?
The governor has, introduced it once again. I don't think that's going to be part of this year's budget discussion. And I think by this point, the governor is kind of realistic that that's probably not going to happen this year.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk education funding. That is always, if not one of the major sticking points in a budget. The formulas that must be worked out, the desire of so many to have legislation to replace property taxes, and that grinds on and on and on, and still no change in that. So talk about education funding and what we're expecting from these budget discussions happening this month.
I think you'll see some increases overall in education funding, basic education, the direct money to the school districts. I think there'll probably be some special ed and pre-K increases as well, and you'll probably see a slight uptick in higher education funding across the board for our community colleges, current technical programs, as well as the state system. So, like I said, getting back to where things have been about a decade ago, where you're steadily trying to invest a few more dollars each year, not go crazy, but invest a few more dollars to help offset the local school district costs, as well as, investing in our kids and their higher education opportunities.
Next hour, we're going to have someone on from the Commonwealth Foundation talking about school districts holding large fund balances and how that plays into the budget mix as well, particularly those school districts that have huge fund balances but are still asking for index increases. That issue is, I don't think that's part of this year's budget discussions, but it's certainly something that people have to be paying attention to.
It's not really part of the state's budget discussion, but certainly should be part of each school district's budget discussion, which I know they're trying to finalize their budgets by the end of June as well. I don't know the actual fund balances of our local school districts, but in some cases, you've got school districts across the state where they're sitting on 50% or 100% of their operating budget in an unreserved fund, money that's not set away for a capital project, just unreserved in one form or another. And, certainly, prudent financial management would say I would think it would be difficult to go and ask the taxpayers for additional dollars through tax revenue if you're sitting on huge fund balances within your own school district. I think the aggregate total is like $4 billion is sitting in unreserved funds across the state. Again, I think most of our local school districts have fund balances that are much more responsible in that manner. I think they recommend you be in the 8 to 10% range, just in case, you have a storm come through, a tornado or something like that, where you got to replace a roof or a heating or an air conditioning system or something big. But certainly when you get on to 50% of your budget or 100% of your budget, it does certainly lead to a number of different questions.
Yeah, certainly. And school districts as well, they look at the way the budget discussions have gone the last 10 years or so, and they say, we'd better hold on to some extra money because we don't know what's coming from the state.
Yeah, you want to have that money sitting in a savings account. It's what the right total is. And what the right total is if you are anticipating that you want to go ask taxpayers for additional dollars. So I think you got to pick that responsible level, but hoarding cash and still asking for tax increases every year is certainly, as a taxpayer myself, something I would, frown upon.
State system of higher education. Of course, we're very concerned about that because IUP is right here in our community. And that is always a part of the budget discussion that can sometimes get a little bit rancorous, let's say. This is the state funding state higher education, state system schools enough because the formula keeps shifting downward.
Could the state add more dollars to higher education, the state system? I think certainly they could. We've done so the last couple years, and this year we'll, third or fourth year in a row, you'll see an increase to the state system. I think creates a positive trend line. And, you have to remember, number one, the state owns the state system as opposed to all the state-related universities and other universities out there. The state actually owns the state system, each, brick, each building, each computer. And a school like IUP is owned by the Commonwealth, owned by the taxpayers. And, the state really invests in two ways to the state system. We have the direct money that goes into the school's operating budget, but we also have the FIA grant program that goes directly to the students to be able to subsidize their tuition at the state system school. So you really have two pots of money coming in to fund the state system.
What was your reaction when the Joint Committee released the findings of the commission that did the study of state system and made the recommendations, some of which were very, very drastic recommendations and sort of took people aback? What was your reaction upon hearing those recommendations?
I guess my reaction was people are all over the board right now on what the state system should look like. I know they just hired a new chancellor to start in September. I think the first thing they need in charge of the state system, they need a solid leader who can actually try to bring people together as opposed to divide them. You can't really have, the administration fighting with the faculty, fighting with, the students on a constant basis if you're going to try to move that system forward. Look, I think there's some glowing problems out there that needs to be addressed. For some of these regions, I think a more multi-purposed academic environment at some of these institutions is probably a good idea. A better coordination between career and technical community colleges and our state system is probably in line. You look at Pennsylvania as a whole with educational opportunities. We have the best in the world, but we don't coordinate them very well together. And it seems like since the state system is the portion owned by the taxpayers, that seems like that's the proper mechanism to help coordinate those efforts from the bottom to the top levels and focus on the students and their futures as opposed to just the territorial battles of, well, we want our 2%, they want their 2%, we'd like their 2% to come over and we get 4%. How about we just focus on the students' needs and how they can be successful? And I personally think the state system is the right mechanism to coordinate those efforts, from some of those other academic learning environments to really actually get a 21st century academic excellence within education in the state.
We're with State House Majority Leader Dave Reed for a couple of more moments. You're not at the 2-minute warning yet, but it is the fourth quarter for your term in office. Does that change anything about the way that you approach the summer legislative season and through the summer months heading toward November?
Look, I think the biggest thing it changes is, I'm not out campaigning normally. This is the first time in an even year that I have not been, getting petitions, knocking on doors, raising money, all that type of stuff that comes with the job. And also, to be honest, the job in Harrisburg, you're a little bit less concerned with who's jockeying for what leadership position, what the majority is going to look like after November, and just get the focus on the policy side of the equation, which for me is kind of refreshing. And I had a conversation recently with a legislator who went through a similar experience, and I made the comment that if you could only do this job under that sort of environment all the time, it would be an amazing job to do. Yeah. But you only get that opportunity your last 6 or 7 months in office. So I'm enjoying it from the legislative perspective. Nothing changes for me. I've got a couple things locally I want to make sure we get done before I leave office, and want to wrap up one final budget.
Okay, so during these final periods of the legislative term, what are the things you're going to be looking to do over the course of the summer?
Well, hopefully a budget will be done by the end of June. Certainly we still have the redistricting issue that's hanging out there. I don't know whether we'll be able to reach an agreement with the Senate and the governor before the July deadline to publish that for the constitutional amendment. I think some changes to our redistricting process would be positive. in Pennsylvania. The property tax issue, it seems, like a lot of folks have gotten more into election mode than policy mode on that particular issue. But if the opportunity's there, I still, and I think a lot of folks in Indiana County would like to see that system completely overhauled and fund our schools with a different revenue source. And I think just some good government legislation talking about open primaries a little bit, or at least allowing independents to choose which primary to vote in, could lead to a better electoral system in this state.
All right, very good. Thank you for coming in this morning.
You're welcome, Todd. Have a good day.
Our State House Majority Leader, Dave Reed. It is Indiana in the Morning, presented, as always, by First Commonwealth Bank here on WCCS 101.1 FM and AM 1160.